Welcome today to our very special episode of our Lance Wallnau Show. It's when we talk about level 10 living. It's actually my favorite show. We don't do it enough. We only do it every Saturday. And so one day a week, we get to go into the founder psychology of how do you create the world that you want to live. And you would think that would be something we talk about a lot more because you're having to figure out every day of your life how to create the world that you want. And the fact that the Bible gives you permission to not be controlled by circumstance, to not be controlled by pressure. In fact, the promise in the Bible is, be not conformed to this world, but be transformed by the changing of the way you think, the renewing of your mind. That promise alone ought to be enough to really be the Liberty Bell for Christianity, because God is saying, hey, I don't care what goes on in the world around you. You're not supposed to be shaped by that. The implication is you can reshape your life and your circumstances from the inside out based on the renewing of the mind. Now, renewing the mind on I would say particularly on thinking the way that God thinks and using the technology of the recreated human spirit. That's where the level 10 living really came to me. I was studying Tony Robbins and Stephen Covey and all of these success gurus that have very powerful insight into the practical human psychological dimension of peak performance. But then I was coming at it as a Pentecostal. And I said, but where does this tie in? So I'm going to give you an example of what I'm talking about. Go to Daniel in the Bible, Daniel chapter 1.
Oh, Danny boy.
And I've got Carl here with me today. I've got Mercedes with me today. We're going to do some tame ministry. But Daniel chapter 1 talks about these young hostages to Babylon, taken from their environment as young Jewish boys because their nation was being judged. And so they ended up being exported in a wave. There were 2 or 3 waves of Babylonian exporting. And what the kings would do in those days, as Nebuchadnezzar did, the first wave took the most promising and most talented and gifted people in the empire you had conquered to do the first fruits. You cull them out first and put them into your own employment. So if you have extraordinary talent, you want to, it's like Napoleon did this, conquerors do this. You want to assimilate conquered territory. First start with the fruits. What kind of great assets do they have? What kind of mineral resources? What kind of people resources? They're now mine. Daniel and his friends went in the first wave. They were families that were royal families. That meant that Daniel came from privilege. And so did his friends. And now they were slaves, but they were the first fruits of the conquest of Nebuchadnezzar. And so the king ordered the chief of the officials to bring in some of the sons of Israel, chapter 1, verse 3. Now you know what I'm talking about. There was probably 3 waves of Nebuchadnezzar's culling the harvest of this conquered people. Daniel went in the first wave, including some of the royal family and of the nobles' youths. There you go. This is the aristocracy's kids were now being taken to Babylon, in whom there was no defect. They didn't want any of the kids that had any deformities or defects because they were going to be vetted for being in the court and entourage of Nebuchadnezzar. So they wanted good-looking kids that were showing intelligence in every branch of wisdom, endowed with understanding and discerning knowledge, who had the ability for serving in the king's court. They had to be able to handle themselves in the company of royalty in Babylon. And he ordered him to teach them the literature and the language of the Chaldeans. This is our history. This is our language. This is our religion. So these kids had to get educated in a foreign culture and a foreign language. And the king appointed for them a daily ration from the king's choice food, from the wine which he drank, and appointed that they should be educated 3 years. 3 years of mentoring and training of the elite best of the Jews, who would be almost like, you look at this like The Apprentice with Donald Trump or a TV show. They're going to go in and meet Nebuchadnezzar. He's going to personally investigate each of them and cherry pick the ones he liked most to be on his team. So this is kind of an interesting moment here. So at the end of 3 years, they would enter into the personal service of the king. Now from among them were the sons of Judah. And then it goes on to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And the commander of the officials assigned new names. They're losing their identity. They're supposedly losing their religion. And they're given new Babylonian names. They're not even going to be able to call themselves by what they used to call themselves. But Daniel made up the decision he wasn't going to defile himself. It's probably a key right there. That he's not going to eat what they are feeding him. This is a metaphor. If Jordan Peterson would look at this and tear it apart a certain way. But it's a statement saying, though you may take me into your Babylonian system, I will not be conformed to your world, but I will be transformed by the renewing of my mind. And that includes my diet. My intake is going to be different than your intake.
Yep.
Now, he designs a test for him and his friends to have a different diet. They come out looking great on their Jewish diet. And as for the 4 youths, verse 17, watch this. God gave them knowledge and intelligence in every branch of literature. So Mercedes and Carl, if this is true in the Old Testament, and the Bible says that we in the New Testament have a new covenant built on better promises and with a better covenant, how much more so should this be true for us than for the Old Testament? These 4 youths, God gave them knowledge and intelligence in every branch of literature, in every branch of wisdom. Notice God gave them, which means that God can multiply evidently your IQ if he wants to. So they understood all kinds. Daniel had, in addition to that, a supernatural acumen, understanding visions and dreams. He could somehow, the mystics and the occult practitioners in Babylon had a science to this, and Daniel exceeded what they did. And at the end of the days which the king had specified for presenting them, the commander of the officials presented them before Nebuchadnezzar. 3 years, remember? Then the king talked with them, and out of them all, not one of them was found like Daniel or Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the king's personal entourage. They're now in the king's personal team. As for every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king consulted them, now here's where I want to go. He found them 10 times better, 10 times better than all the magicians and conjurers who were in the room. This is interesting. Somehow they were being compared, not to 10 times better than the astrologers, the astronomers, and the mathematicians, but they were 10 times superior to the enchanters and the occult practitioners who evidently supplemented their natural skill with occult mastery that gave them a little bit of an edge. And the king goes, these guys are 10 times further down the road than you are. I don't know what the test was. I have no idea how Nebuchadnezzar came to the conclusion that they were 10 times better than his magicians. But he came up with that conclusion. And Daniel continued, and this is so cute for me, until the first year of Cyrus. Because as you know from my personal story, Isaiah 45 is when the prophecy of Cyrus comes along. And Cyrus will be the end of the Babylonian Empire. Daniel will go in there as an emasculated or castrated youth to serve as a eunuch in the Babylonian government. This remarkable man will have a long and prestigious career of some 80 years of exemplary service. The Bible gives him this book. But he will live long enough to see the vengeance of his prayers, which is that this nation, that my nation sinned and came under the power of, will be delivered. And he prayed for the liberation of God's people back to the promised land. He had a promise from Jeremiah, 70 years and you'll go back. Cyrus comes along. So I'm figuring Daniel must have been in his 20s or so when some of this stuff's going on. Because 70 years later, Cyrus comes to power. And you might want to know, when did that happen? It happened on the night in which Nebuchadnezzar, his grandson, not his son, but his grandson, or maybe it was his son. No, it would have been his grandson, when he's toasting the gods of, the Babylonian gods, and the finger writes on the wall, Daniel comes in and interprets the dream. That was the night when that king was slain and Cyrus came to power. According to this, he continued until the first year of Cyrus, which meant that he served in government until the end of the first year of the new king. That was the Persian who took over the Babylonian world. So it's kind of interesting closure right there. All in chapter 1, you have the full life of Daniel kind of summarized. The reason I'm taking time to read that is I want us to remember the 10-time promise is that the Bible speaks of being 10 times better. But we often think of that as being 10 times. Then Christians think about, it's like soul winning, evangelism, healing. We kind of narrow this down almost narrowly, religiously, into like one little mountain out of 7. But these guys served in government. They served over economic development. They served over agricultural development. In other words, they had broad, sweeping capacities in areas of dreams and visions, the supernatural, and the natural domain of an empire. And I want you to see that God gave them that ability. That's my opening for this. Level 10 living really is the 10 times factor. What could we learn about the science, if there's something to learn here, about how the science of the spirit and the science of the natural work together? There's a natural realm, just as much God's realm as the spirit realm. I think this is the other thing this is interesting to me, that we look at the spiritual realm as though it's the only realm. It's a religious thing. We look at it as though it's the sacred realm. But it's because of that kind of thinking that for years families were dysfunctional in church because fathers said that, the gospel is more important than their wives or their kids. Now, there's been a lot of guilt and adjustment in my lifetime over that subject, where the family is reinforced as being more important than anything. I think we're finally getting that awareness that God and serving God doesn't mean your family and your health and your finances are immaterial, secular, and unimportant. I do think that our religious heritage, and for the noblest of reasons, neglected these things because they thought they were just secular and not spiritual. So you got all these stories, disaster stories of pastors retiring from their lifelong service at church, and then the dorky church puts them out to pasture, and the pastor's broke. And there's like a burden to the people because they have to build the new church and bring in the new pastor, plus they got old pastor so-and-so. And I'm telling you, this is a classic story in America too, where people are run themselves down physically because they're so zealous for God, they neglect their own health. All of that is actually imbalanced because it comes out of the fact that God is the God of finance. He's the God of health. He's the God of marriage. He's the God of education. He's the God of science. He's the God of economics. That's why my vision or revelation on the God of the 7 mountains and this level 10 product are my 2 contributions to Christian conversation. There's a higher realm of performance, and it's not all just spirit. It's spirit and natural. And there's a broader range than just spirit. There's the religion mountain, and all 7 mountains are spiritual. Business is just as spiritual phenomena as church, because it's the God who runs the system that you are relying on. So, having said all that, let's and that should be the preamble for level 10. All the teaching we do, come to think of it. I want to look at the. Are we starting, Carl, with page 17 because that's where we left off, or that's where I was?
No, that's where I wanted us to pick up. I think that it lends itself to the greater conversation, and even though it's not linear in the sense of picking up right where we left off on your ultimate life strategy, it does lend itself to the greater conversation. So that's where I was hoping to pick up.
All right, so to lead into that, let's go to page 15, just because I'm looking here. For those of you that are new to this conversation, I want to go here and give you the big picture real quick. But the big picture we've got is that life as a puzzle. By the way, we're using, if you're not working and following along with us, Mercedes, what can they do to get the manual? What can they do?
Yeah, so we'd like to do the Level 10 Livings at least once a week on a Saturday, like Lance was talking about. So we actually literally go right through this booklet with you. And so we've got additional teaching that's also accompanies this manual that you can watch at home. But this is really just kind of like a surface levels. If you were to think of it as like snorkeling, we're snorkeling through the level 10 material. But if you want to do a deep dive, you can get this whole, it's a folder. It's got all the teaching, the whole booklet. You can get the entire thing called Unlocking Your Story at lancewallnau.com. And you can also get it at level10living.com. So, and hey, use the promo code podcast and you're going to get a discount. I think right now it's a 10% discount. So anyways, follow along with us, page 17. Lance, take it back. Here you go. Throwing it back to you.
Okay, so here we go. We got
Take it away.
Take it away.
Take it away. We got a level 10 there, 5, go to 1 right here. So the idea here is that there is a place. There is a place.
Christian Harfouche.
There is a place, Christian Harfouche would say, there is a place. There's a place in the future called where God has put your face, your prophetic destiny, if you will. God has something planned for you. And when you stand before the Lord, you're going to give an account for the life that He intended. And you'll see what percentage of that life did you actually live. But it's an interesting proposition that it's possible to have a level 10-10. So Daniel in our book is really a 10-10 model. And John says this is life you have more abundantly. What? That you should do the thing that the Father called you to do, that you should finish the work He gave you to do. That's the abundant life. It starts with your personal power, the gifts, talents, and abilities God gave you. You have everything you need to accomplish your prophetic purpose. And what you lack in the natural, God can give you by the gifts of the Spirit to enable you to go where you've got to go. But if this is your power, your skills, your talents and abilities, this is the all-important heart. Because in Christianity, it's the heart of the matter that's the heart of the matter. It's your relationship with God, your integrity with yourself, your true north alignment with what you know is true. Your conscience plays a role in this. But there's a level 10 area there. Now suppose you're, and then of course there's where you are right now. It's taking an inventory of where you're at in the journey. What age are you at? How clear are you on what your gifts, talents, and callings are? How clear are you on your prophetic purpose, what God called you to do? How good are you at analyzing or understanding the mercurial nature of emotions and feelings and how to bring your state in alignment with what you got to do to get the job done? And that, of course, leads us to the path. The path is that winding road that we're on that enables us to get where we've got to go. The material we're going to cover talks about the path that gets you from where you are to where you ultimately want to go. And let me just say this by way of illustration, because it reveals so much. If in the wheel of life, in your present life, my wife's really big on the wheel, she'll talk about, well, how's your marriage over here? How are your children over here? How's your financial life over here? How's your health? Well, wait a second. Your spirit life, marriage, children, family, or finances, health. How many of you know if any of those parts of your life are hurting, it'll put a real, disruption into your journey. So here's the idea. If you're living at a level 5 awareness of God's financial provision in your life, and you're at a level 5 in terms of your emotional state, you're sometimes anxious, worried, nervous, uncertain. Well, look at this. This is how much of the abundance God has you're leaving on the table because you haven't embraced the wisdom that is necessary to be able to manage that area. Or suppose it has to do with relationships. Suppose you're at like a level 9 in terms of your love for somebody. But here again, suppose that you're only halfway knowledgeable as to how to connect with them, how to communicate that love, how to get over differences between you. What if they're not motivated to make the relationship work and you are? You're leaving this much relational equity on the table. The point that I want to make is, I'm always interested in growth because at any season of life, depending on what area of life you're working with, you're always working with what do you know in terms of the wisdom of God and how are you managing yourself and your heart journey as you're trying to make the thing work. this is so important. This can actually help you to raise the bar here. But if you raise the bar here, but your heart is drawn from God or drawn from the power of the Spirit of God, then we diminish in strength. But this model here, which one is the X and the Y axis on this?
X is the horizontal, Y is the vertical.
Okay, so X is down here, Y is up here. So this XY axis is a constant awareness for me. Or this has to do really with the heart. This has to do with the head, wisdom, and staying in the, I call it passion, but it really has to do with keeping yourself in the zeal, the love, the engagement necessary to be able to do the journey. Okay, so that's the best I can do. Carl, take us from there into where you want the focus to go.
Global beliefs. And you had mentioned how within the Christian faith, a lot of times the body of Christ will hyper-spiritualize things rather than address the natural things or the physiological things. So that's why I wanted us to talk about on page 18, examining our global beliefs. And if you're open, I wanted to address something that had been brought up in a previous broadcast, talking about the spiritual nature of picking up on other people's energy, psychic energy, mental energy, the spirits that they have, and how it actually can be boiled down to a chemical process that's going on in our olfactory senses that we're not actually aware of that's going on. So if you guys in the back could possibly pull up that first video that says, it's How Not to Be Awkward, I think is the title of it, but this is just a small excerpt from a YouTube broadcast. But yeah, if you guys could pull up that
This is going to sound so weird. I actually think that we pick up on more chemically than we realize.
Yeah, talk to me about that.
Okay, so I don't believe in psychics, and I don't believe in psychic energy, but I do believe that things happen beyond our conscious awareness in this sense. So there was a study that was done that looked at fear. So what they did is they took participants, they had them wear sweat pads, absorbent sweat pads, and run on the treadmill. And they collected sweat from these people running on the treadmill. Then they had participants wear sweat pads and jump out of an airplane for a first-time skydiving experience, okay? So they had sweat pads that were just treadmill sweat pads, and they had first skydiving sweat pads, okay? Same sweat, but is it really? Then they had participants in a lab sit in an fMRI machine, so their brain was being scanned, and smell, kind of gross, both pads. They did not know what they were smelling. They had no idea what they were smelling. They found that when participants smelled the fear sweat pads, the skydiving sweat pads, their own fear response activated in their brain. Wow. So that means that somehow I think that we can smell emotions. So if you are with someone and they are either they do not mean well for you or they are planning on taking a swipe at your neck, you somehow smell that threat. And even though consciously your brain is going, they didn't say anything, they didn't do anything, their body language is okay, it seems all okay. The other part of your brain, the animal part of your brain, which is firing in fear response or threat response, is going, no, watch out. And that's what keeps you up at night, is your conscious brain wrestling with the unconscious part of your brain. I think that that's when we talk about being psychic or having premonitions, I think that that's actually what's happening. We're smelling or picking up on things that we don't even realize.
Cool. So yeah, just a quick rundown on what it was. There was an experiment done on individuals. They put sweat pads on, and then they gauged people's responses to smelling those things. And what they found was that people were able to unconsciously or subconsciously actually pick up on the stress indicators, smell from their olfactory senses. So it's not just a spiritual thing that you're picking up on. It's actually a chemical thing that you might not be aware of. And so trying to reason that and trying to figure out what the global beliefs are that we go into these situations can help us recalibrate ourselves in those different situations.
Let me just slow down for a second since we're going in this unusual area. So what you're saying is people, was it women or men? Both? It didn't matter if they smelled the perspiration, the scent of fear.
Yes.
They felt fear themselves.
Not only did they feel it, they did an fMRI, so they were doing brain scans, and the fear area of the brain was activated.
Huh.
So it wasn't just an emotional response, it was actually a mental response as well.
But I didn't hear anything about the workout sweat. That sweat had nothing to do with anything, right?
It just smelled bad.
There
was no change in brain activity.
Okay, interesting.
Other than maybe like slight repulsion, but that wasn't mentioned. That was just kind of a natural occurrence.
Interesting. Well, okay, so, but I mean, this goes to the whole scent in the animal kingdom too. where animals can pick up and they could smell all kinds of things. They could smell fear. They could smell predators. They could smell. I mean, when I went hunting for elk, and what was highly instructive to me as a novice hunter was that they would say, be careful about any noise you make, because those elk, I mean, we're talking like half a mile away. I mean, I could see them in a valley with a telescope, binoculars, and would try to kind of be sneaking up on them. They could smell you. You had to stay like downwind of the elk, because if they caught a whiff of you across the forest, they could tell. So when we're talking about this heightened sense of capacity, it does make sense that there's these things that are going on that are unconscious, which maybe accounts for the cologne and perfume,
the pheromones,
idea in the first place, which is trying to mask, or create the scent, right?
Yeah, so I'm glad that you brought up that, because yes, there are, of course, supplements that you can take to change your smell, but it really boils down ultimately to diet. So in a spiritual sense, what are we feeding ourselves? What are we ingesting? What are we taking in? And then that's going to kind of set the table for how we're going to be thinking and showing up in future endeavors.
Oh, you made a quick jump there. Okay, so what you're taking in is going to affect your fear factor, right? Mm-hmm. Or your hope, your optimism. If we look at the ideas here on global beliefs, I guess we could skip over. For those of you that we just did part 2, examining your path to destiny. I showed you this and what goes into that. In part 3, we look at examining what work means to you, fill in the blank. And this has to do with beliefs. So you'd be surprised how you may not even question your belief system, but you have an attitude about work. And it affects how you approach work. It's kind of like you could tell your diet, what you grew up with, by whether work is a positive or a negative connotation. Same thing with money. Like for some people, like it's unusual. I think I'm still working through a negative association with money, because to me, it's the nasty thing you've got to deal with that could get in the way of what you want to do. And I often think about Kim Clement. He had this, he was a gregarious giver, but there was never enough money for what this guy wanted to do. And he sowed aggressively. And when I say sowed, I mean he gave aggressively in offerings. He basically taught me how to live without fear of financial limit, because he had a contempt, in a sense, almost for money.
Yeah.
Because money could get in the way of what he wanted. So he gave as though he was assaulting finances in order to create the abundance of access to do whatever he wanted to do. And one time I remember we were in a meeting, and it was, I don't know who was preaching, someone was preaching, and I had a checkbook, and I guess I had written, I thought it was a pretty generous check for a guy with a limited payroll and on a staff in a church at the time. I was no longer in business. I wrote like $100 offering or something like that, $150 offering. And Kim looked at it and he just disapproved. He disapproved of my offering. And he was looking for his own billfold, and he didn't have it. So he took my checkbook.
Yes, he did.
Tore a check out of it and wrote it like a $500 check, and then had me sign it. And then he put it in, very satisfied that he had made the offering that he was supposed to make out of my money. Mm-hmm. Never even, I'm going to tell you, it was totally, in his brain, it was his offering. And I thought later, he probably got credit for it, because I didn't have faith for that. He took it from my account. He had faith for $500.
Well, no, you borrowed his faith, right? Because you did sign off on the check quite literally.
I did. Okay, thank you. I figured. But he taught me a lot. But he would always lose his wallet, is why I'm bringing him up. He was constantly, the reason why he didn't have it with him there is because he kept losing it. And then one day he said to me, he says, I think I'm doing it subconsciously because I hate having to deal with money.
Yeah.
I just want to do what I want to do, and I don't. So here's the point. Your global beliefs about work, about marriage, about women, about men, about children, you'd be shocked how you are not a blank slate. In any of these areas, you have a belief already there. The question is, are you even aware of what your global beliefs are? What we've established during this broadcast, just to clarify, is there are these 6 areas of life's puzzle. Understanding what your gifts are, your talents and abilities. I can't get away from that because where you want to go prophetically is attached to the way God wired you, how he designed you. But the path getting there, as you can see, is where wisdom is profitable to direct, the Bible says. Ecclesiastes 10:10. Wisdom is profitable to direct. So we're looking at the belief systems we have and how they get in the way or help us move towards where we want to go. And when we come back in the next episode, I'm going to talk about what my children, like Carl, grew up with around the house and my observation, and also how you can change those beliefs because right away your life is going to reflect the progress you're making in your belief system. And for those of you that are not with us in this powerful journey of actually fulfilling your prophetic purpose, the science of fulfilling your purpose, once again, Mercedes, where can they go to get this?
Level10living.com. You can follow along with us. And like I said, this is really just the 30,000 foot view of what this material really is because we can't get to everything in this booklet. And when Carl adds his commentary, I mean, it's amazing. It enriches it all the more. Carl and I Carl and I are kind of like brother and sister sometimes here. But he reminds me so much of my actual brother. But anyways, Unlocking Your Story. You can go get it and follow along with us and make sure you join us next Saturday for the next installment of this great broadcast. Level10living.com. Thanks for watching.
Did you enjoy this latest episode? Please remember to share it with your friends because the more knowledge you have, the better